The Open Society Institute is publishing in 1, 2, 3 months a report about the situation of Muslims in the city of Copenhagen. What I will do is to give a very short, brief overview of what I see as the general situation of Muslims in Copenhagen and Denmark in general, in order to place the cultural sphere in a broader social and political context, and a few remarks about the specific role of culture in the end of my short intervention here. Well, what is the situation of Muslims in Denmark? Well, first of all, one must remember that Denmark is a quite new country with regard to immigration, unlike the UK, for example, several generations of immigration. But first of all, there's the good news, which still is, in my opinion, in both research and in particular popular media, is not recognized enough. But a growing number of politicians and scholars argue that we have seen a small revolution during the last 10 years in Denmark, 10 to 15 years. That is, in using hard facts, that the employment rates has grown dramatically for the immigrant population. And even now, where we have a turn down in employment due to the financial crisis, which also has hit Denmark a bit, unemployment rates has grown less among the immigrant population than the native Danes, and this is really a new positive trend. The second very good news is that educational levels, including the rate of youngsters going to the university, but education in general, has also increased a lot among the youth. Today, recent figures states that the share of immigrant young women going to the university are bigger today among the immigrant population than the native Danes. So this is really a news and is right now discussed a lot. And in particular, girls with a Muslims background score very high in with regard to education. The situation of the boys, the young boys, are a bit is not as good as for the girls, but still the general picture is improvement. With regard to political representation, it's a bit more complicated, but I would argue that in general you could say that you have visible, clever politicians with a Muslim background in several political parties has more impact and power today than, let's say, 10 years ago. In other research, and also Mustafa's reports, coming report will support this. When we look at the immigrant population and the Muslim population in Denmark, it's also it's important to remember it's not a homogeneous group. There are groups living in poverty and at the lower levels of social benefits in Denmark. There are a minority who feels discriminated against in public policy arenas. But still, the general picture is that most people feel relatively satisfied and express that they recognize the good health care and free education, etc., classical welfare services, plus democracy. So in some aspects, the paradox is, or not a paradox, but it's worth to note that immigrants in a lot of ways are more satisfied with how society is developed than the Danes. In some areas, the Danes are more critical towards, let's say, social policy, low problems of poverty, etc. So that's on the one hand observations. The bad news, or the more critical points in Denmark, is that first of all, the national political discourse from, for example, the Danish People's Party in the parliament still has this very Islamophobic tone, anti-Muslim tone, which is really a problem. And this party has still between 10 to 15% of the votes. But there is also, of course, a growing critique of this anti-Islamophobic, anti-Muslim rhetoric. So we have a part. In Copenhagen here, some of my colleagues recently launched another study of the Muslims in Copenhagen, the Pakistan community, and they summarized the results in this way: it's easier to become a Copenhagener with an immigrant or Muslim background than to become a Dane. So in short, you could say at the city level, quite a lot of progress, positive developments, although still also problems. The problem is mainly the national political discourse. So we have a paradox here, and that's why I think that these studies which the OSI has promoted about politics and data and experiences from the city level is extremely important and productive to bring into the debate about the future challenges in this policy field. Okay, so in this context, like Klaus Bondam stated, the cultural policy, cultural meetings and events, not least like this one, is of course important in order to push forward an active politics of cultural diversity in a spirit of openness and pluralism, or a politics of recognition, in particular including also religious activities, which always tend to be the most difficult and issues to have a sober debate over in the public discourse. In practical policy development, Denmark and Copenhagen also can still learn a lot from other European cities which have a more advanced approach in order to an active politics of also religious pluralism. My last remarks about culture. Well, I'm not a cultural sociologist, or it's not really my field. But as an opening to also the later debate, I think cultural expressions have at least two dimensions. The one is culture as expression of identity, and of course that's important in itself. In Denmark, we have some very positive experiences using children and their artistic, for example, rap music or other things. Children's cultural expressions, using them as ambassadors. That would say, for example, schools with a majority of pupils with a Muslim background would go to other schools with a few Muslim children and express their and present their art. So also, for example, in school politics, this exchange of cultural expressions is is also important. The other part, the other dimension of culture, the first one, culture as expression of identity, is more a culture as a way of developing mutual recognition across different identities. That is to develop the creative melting pot in society of diverse cultural expression. And that should also always be a goal in itself.